for the training. They just invested 23 hours in learning more about your industry. So give them an opportunity to at least interview. But I'm also open. I've asked the businesses to, if there's another way that they can make the trainee a preferred candidate, I'm open to it. It doesn't have to be that they're automatically get an interview or a higher salary, although several businesses have already said they're going to give a higher salary, which is wonderful. So if everyone could just please encourage Warren County businesses in retail, food and beverage, or lodging to become a push partner if they know that they're going to need to hire folks this spring and summer. Your help would be greatly appreciated there.
All right, supervisors, you heard it here. Get out there and help Liza. She helps us every day. This is how we can help her. Liza, did you want to go on?
Yes, thank you. So part of filling our workforce this spring and summer, but also responding to all of the aftermath of the pandemic, is really investing in our younger workforce. And so there's a goal right now to get as many teenagers into the workforce as possible. Many of them were a huge help last summer, and we need more of them this year. Not only does it help the businesses, but it really helps the students, the high school students, 14 and up, to gain valuable job skills, to get access to additional role models in the community, to have constructive use of their time, right? They're less likely to engage in risky behaviors if they are engaged in productive behaviors. And we're also instilling work ethic into our younger workforce, which is something that I've heard from many of you that is a concern. So it's really critical that we're engaging our schools. So I shared with the Lake George superintendent last Friday a timeline and a plan of how we can get more youth engaged in our workforce. And the timeline is March to August. So our goal is to, and we had a meeting last week as well with other Warren County superintendents. Our goal is to host some virtual and in-person job fairs for teenagers. Depending on the school district, some of them may prefer virtual and some of them may prefer in-person in the gyms, and that's fine, spaced out. So we're working on that. We're also making sure that youth are a part of this process in engaging their peers. So the Lake George High School principal, Fran, is helping me recruit youth who've been working to do some TikTok videos about why they have enjoyed working in our community. And we're hoping that that will encourage their peers too as well. And I've shared some question prompts with him that he can have the youth use. And then we have youth flyers and other things, but I really want to reiterate to everyone that I think it's critical that we get youth more into our workforce, not only because our local hospitality and other businesses need them, but because I think that our youth really need it after all they've been through with the pandemic. I think we've seen mental health challenges and substance abuse challenges, and we will continue to see those. And getting youth engaged in the workforce is one way that we can counteract those effects. So, and then just a couple other things. I've shared with Warren County HR department that we can use our online training platform for Warren County employees as well. So I've asked Jackie to ask department heads about what topics they're interested in, what challenges they face with their employees. So the goal is that we can have more Warren County employees upskilled through online learning around any categories. There's everything from computer skills to customer service. And so we're looking into that. And eventually we could have our own Warren County course badges for orientation by departments, or even in response to concerning behaviors around employee professionalism. So I'm excited about that. And Chairwoman Sieber and Supervisor Bramer are also a part of those conversations. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see where the interest is, where the needs are, and then we'll pilot it to see what works for Warren County employees to continue to upskill our colleagues. And I'm continuing to just address the barriers to employment. So we know that transportation and childcare continue to be our biggest barriers. And I sent a meeting request out. We'll have our first proposal meeting about the bike share program extending to Warren County. That's next Wednesday. Everybody should have received an invitation. And thank you, Supervisor Stroud, for your support on that initiative. That's really an informational meeting. It will be public. That's an informational meeting to get questions answered and also to just hear feedback from everyone about that proposal. And that meeting is, I'll be facilitating it, but Greater Glens Falls Transit and CDTA will be present to give an overview. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to share is that I had an intern start, a grad student from Marist College. In the future, I do hope to have more local interns, but I'm very excited about this particular intern because he is going to help us a lot with some of our technology challenges around making our website more user-friendly, feedback with our evaluation process, and really just streamlining our logistics and services to make sure, and getting feedback, right, from a younger person who is better with technology than some of us, and using his skills as well, because he has been supporting other folks with gaining employment for our area. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm happy to answer any other general questions anyone has around employment or training.
Question.
Supervisor Garrity.
Yeah, Liza, how about how are we doing? Do we have a lot of people interested in being lifeguards? Because that's always a shortage that every community faces. You have to line them up almost a year in advance. So if you can steer anybody into that, wanting to be a lifeguard, that would be helpful. I think we're okay in Warrensburg next year, but you never know. And it's something that they got to grow into, you know, and usually you need at least 3 or 4 people on to have a successful program, plus teaching swimming lessons also. So I think that's very important that we keep that at the focus for the younger people. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Garrity. I haven't received any interest about lifeguards, but I'm happy to get the word out more. And actually, on our youth work flyers, we include some photos of lifeguards, so that's good. And hopefully, youth will see that that's an option for them. And really, that's a great life skill that they should have anyways. So I'm happy to help promote that. And if there are particular businesses who need lifeguards, please have them reach out with job postings.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else on the committee have any questions for Liza? Anybody in the boardroom? Well, Liza, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. As somebody who's been trapped in the house with 3 18-year-olds, I can speak to the power of TikTok. So I think that's brilliant. And we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, but I do not see him here, is supposed to be Jim Siplon. Yes. Oh, Jim, is that you? There you are. All right. Jim, what have you got for us today?
I'm going to pass out the materials that we're going to profile.
He's passing out the materials that he's going to discuss.
I realize this is asking somebody to scramble, but do we have them digitally? Ah, thank you, Tammy.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? All working? Is that a yes?
It's good, Jim. I can hear you. It's Mike.
Great, thank you.
By the way, congratulations on your new job.
Thank you. So I wanted to provide you guys an update across a number of topics. You can see on the, go ahead and flip to the next chart for me. Thank you. These are the things I wanted to try to cover quickly for you, but there's some data here that is new and information that's hopefully useful to you. So the first thing I wanted to do is give you some sense of the current cross-section of economic activity that we're supporting in the county. Go ahead, thank you. In the past, we've broken down all of the inquiries or projects that we have really by timing. What's come in the last 30 days, what's come in the last few months, what's come over the last year. One of the things that is also helpful is to occasionally look at it by where is this activity. So I broke down our current list of roughly 53 active projects or inquiries. These are businesses that have reached out to us that are either looking to expand or relocate here. Could be a project that involves potentially bringing a business here. There's any number of criteria for this, but we have more than 50 active things that we're expending resource on. And of those 50, I broke them down so you could see where are they. The orange in that first bar is Glens Falls. The gray in that first bar is Queensbury, and all the other colors represent different communities in the county. And what that quickly shows you is that, not exactly, but roughly, the activity is what we would hope. Roughly a third in the city, a third in the town of Queensbury, and a third in the larger county. I'm encouraged by that. It does not mean that we're seeing activity solely in the corridor of Glens Falls and Queensbury. In addition, there are a number of activities that don't have a location yet. They were identified to us maybe as a potential that could go anywhere in the county, and so I reflected that as well. There's a couple that I wanted to point out to you. I mentioned the Merrill-McGee only because it's been publicly disclosed. In general, we keep all of this close until somebody gives us permission to talk specifically about their identity. But Ash in Warrensburg has made it clear that he's investing in Merrill-McGee and has already made significant investment in that community. We're working with him to try to help him optimize what is the best approach for seeking either economic incentives or potential aid across the spectrum of operations that he has in Warrensburg, but I suspect that the Merrill-McGee will be the focus of that. In addition, there's a new developer in Glens Falls who is not someone who has already done any development work, and we're not talking about this as a perspective. They're already purchased property and doing work in downtown Glens Falls. Now, they will slowly unveil themselves, but we are helping them as well identify what potential opportunities there are for either financial supports or other programs that may assist them. There is a proposed, and this is very early stage, mixed use idea for the Lake George corridor. I don't even think this is far enough formed yet for us to really have dialogue with anybody in Lake George, but I'm hopeful that in the next month or two, it will mature to the point where we will have a potential proposal to discuss with Lake George about the applicability and potential of that. There is an entity in Glens Falls that is seeking to move from another state. It's a small food entity that has what I consider to be reasonable growth plans. I think this is a very encouraging entity. They've already purchased property to live, so I think their intention to move their business is probably better than not. And finally, there is a very, very large entity that I think is unlikely to actually bear fruit, but I still bring it to your attention because it's important to note that we are on the radar screen for large-scale development. This is a clean tech operation that is looking to specifically take recycled materials and use them, convert them into feedstock for fuel operations for industrial operations. It would take a very large area. They're looking for places that have a combination of industry that could use this material as well as suitable property. I think it's very unlikely that they will choose our location, but the fact that we're on their list of about 8 or 10 sites that they're evaluating is very encouraging. It means, on contrary to some popular belief, our materials are being received by large-scale anonymous site selection experts. So if there is somebody that's looking at potential sites, they're able to use our website, which is how they identified us, find the applicable sites, make contact with us, and determine whether or not we're a candidate for their development. I know we can do better on this, but I think it's helpful for all of us to know that we are not starting at zero. We are visible to the outside world. I think hopefully we will be able to, and what we're going to talk about in this presentation, refine our strategy in such a way that we're actually driving more searches today than we're simply receiving, but I still find this to be very encouraging. I want to stop in case there's any questions about this before we move on.
Anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Thanks, Jim.
Well, we're going to move on to broadband, which is obviously an enormous topic for us all. But there's some real interesting news. As you remember, we embarked primarily at your urging at a very proactive approach to broadband in the fall. Almost immediately after I stepped into the role, the single biggest additional thing we took on was to be very aggressive about trying to figure out where did the county stand in terms of its broadband assets and what was the right strategy to increase our total connectivity. What you're seeing here is a bunch of information on this chart. Let me just cover it one piece at a time. We embarked on a three-phase approach with a vendor called ECC. ECC was the vendor that had initially done our maps. That's why we chose them, because it would go much quicker to take somebody who had already been here and already had this list of assets. What we did not know at the time was that by refining this process with ECC, we were actually defining a process that's being utilized now across the state. I'm going to show you just how that movement has promulgated since we initiated our work with ECC. But we started on a three-phase approach. The first was to go inventory all the physical assets, both in terms of map review and also driving around in trucks looking for equipment on poles or on pads. That process is largely been done. We've already transferred the first big batch of data to Sarah, and she's already begun integrating that into her GIS structures here in the county. The second phase was the survey that we're in the midst of now, where we ask people if they have access, and if they don't, why. But if they do, we actually ask them about their sense of service, we ask them about their sense of cost, and we ask them to actually do a speed test so we can measure the actual throughput of that connection. You can see the first table is just the initial, only after a couple of weeks, response we've gotten to that survey. We're after 2% total. That was our goal, was to get 2% of the county's residents to fill this out. Within 2 weeks, we were able to already achieve that goal. In no way do I want anybody to think of this as a competition. It is not about who has the highest number of people who responds to the survey. But I do think it is helpful for all of you to know in your communities whether or not you are getting the voice of your residents into this process. So I offer this data to you not in any kind of comparative way, but for each of you to digest as you will. And we are already reaching out to any places where we think that the opportunity to go beyond 2% exists. And we will work with you to figure out how can we amplify the message and get more people to participate as you direct us. But I'm quite pleased already with the fact that we have a statistically valid sample and we are getting a good cross-section across the county. In fact, if you look, I would not have imagined that Thurman would lead us in terms of proportional input here, and they do. I think a lot of that has to do with the work, and Kevin Lynch is actually on. I saw him join the Zoom earlier, but Slick just put that new switch in the Thurman corridor. There's intense interest in what that means to everyone there, and I think that translates to people being excited about what is available to them and wanting to participate in telling us whether it's working or not. The third phase is for us to take this data, put it all together in typically a proposal that you would then apply for grants. But one of the things we've discovered here, and by the way, that map shows you the physical addresses that have responded. So you can again see we've got a very good cross-section across the county of people who have taken the speed test and who have taken the time to fill out the survey. But one of the things we figured out is that this problem is not just about connecting. It is certainly about that, at least in part. We want as many entities inside of Warren County to be connected to the outside world as we can possibly, feasibly, reasonably connect. But if somebody doesn't connect and they have access because the service is so unreliable that they don't believe it to work, that doesn't fix their problem. And if somebody doesn't connect because they can't afford to and their kids are not connected to their school or their parents are not connected to their doctor, that's a different problem that goes beyond whether or not fiber is running down their road. All of these are components that we have to address. And not only that, we found that there is power in us addressing this in as big a surface area as possible. locking arms with other entities that are facing the same problem. Warren County is now a part of 4 active working groups. And I know that Ryan is also on a national working group for broadband. This is important because we're learning both best practices, but we're also finding people to team with. In fact, if you don't mind, could you flip to the next chart for me? I want to show you what's happened since we initiated our survey. You can see Warren County, kind of that dark blue on the eastern side of the map. The 2 light blue counties were the 2 that had used ECC to do the process that we are currently executing on in the last 3 years. Completely isolated. They did an ECC study, one in 2017, one in 2019, but there was nothing further other than just reporting that data out to that county. However, when we embarked with ECC and we signed the contract with them in September, every other county in either green, dark blue, or yellow that you see represented on that map has now signed on to the exact same process. We've defined the best practice for upstate New York. 17 counties have followed our lead. And they're not just doing it because we helped them pick an effective process. They're doing it because they see the value in having data that can be merged with ours and others so that we can represent the biggest possible surface area potentially to federal grant money. The Lake George Lake Champlain Planning Board certainly recognized this, which is why they reached out to help any counties in their catchment area that were not already embarking on this, and they stepped in to help subsidize them. Now, I want to tell you that some of you may have this feeling that says, well, I guess we should have waited, because if we'd waited, we might have got some money from Lake George Lake Champlain Planning Board. But we didn't come and ask the county for any additional money to do what we did. We took it out of what we consider to be a significant cash balance and just moved forward with it. But by doing this, we have established ourselves as a leader in the region. And now we are able to work with all these other counties and have the support of the Lake Champlain, Lake George Planning Board in building a regional process that will allow us to put all this data together, maybe on a multi-county basis, apply for bigger grants that will provide more solutions than just pure connectivity. This never would have happened if, number one, you had not asked us to move aggressively, and number two, we had not been afraid to move. You can see what happens when you do the right thing and other people follow. And I'm encouraged by this. It means right now, the State Public Utilities Commission has actually asked to see some of our data to compare it to theirs. The Adirondack Regional Working Group, which has been working on broadband for 3 years, uses our process and our data to fuel their next wave. If I were to have had told you back in September that within months we would be viewed as the leader in broadband for upstate, I think we all would have been surprised. I would have. I didn't think we were in a position of leadership. I thought we were just trying to figure out where we were. But that's where we find ourselves. And now it's up to us to figure out what to do. In addition to the 3 phases with ECC, we've initiated an RFP for what I consider to be phase 4, which is finding a vendor who can help us build a process to work with counties and other entities to aggregate this data and be prepared to solve problems that go beyond connectivity alone. We will certainly generate grant proposals for classic connectivity, additional money, so that we can connect more homes, more businesses, more entities in Warren County. But we will also be looking for funding to work on the issue of affordability, to work on the issue of solutions for those that cannot be connected, to work on the issues of experiments to address the places where we can't get the broadband that we need. Okay, questions there before we move on?
Are there any questions from the committee? Is there anyone in the boardroom? Anybody outside the committee? Sorry about my dog, folks.
I speak dog, and what he says is, this is good.
This is very good, Jim. You're absolutely right. And I want to thank you and the EDC for stepping out on the broadband issue. It's really been exciting to see this happening. And as one of the people who lives in an underserved area, I can't tell you how much we all appreciate your hard work on this. From your report, I once again want to pull out and recognize our Employee of the Month, Sarah Frankenfeld, for the fact that her talents seem to know no bounds. And we rarely go through a committee meeting where we don't hear her involvement and of her work. I also want to observe that what's happening in Warrensburg is a great example of the value of one good partner. You know, it's really cool to see the development that's happening there, and it really is the work of Ash and Anand, and I think that speaks volumes for
I don't know if you know, Andrea, but I have a few more charts.
Excellent. Well, very quickly, I just want to observe that we saw Thurman's leadership in the census response too. And that's kind of cool. So Susan, good work, whatever you're doing, getting the word out. Jim, go ahead.
One last thing about broadband. Kevin Lynch from Slick is actually on the call. I think it's very important to understand. I used to work in the industry, and I can tell you that his business, Slick, we would not be achieving the continued success that we're getting in terms of greater connectivity without him working in this region. Any business that winds up finding its way to Slick is good for the North Country. They've been a wonderful partner, and that Thurman switch is a game changer. We're going to look to do some kind of press event. I've actually talked to Don about coordinating that in the next week or two, just to bring others' attention to the work that they've done. Okay, you mind flipping to the next chart? I wanted to talk to you about another activity that we embarked on. Several weeks ago, I got a call from James McKenna, who runs Roost, which is the Sustainable Tourism Organization out of Lake Placid. And he said, we're going to connect with all the people on our mailing list and ask them if they're thinking about moving here. Would you be interested in being a party to that? I said, absolutely, but we need to ask specific questions about Warren County. And so he agreed to open the survey at the last minute. We added additional surface area for Warren County and specifically around Lake George and the North Creek area to try to ascertain whether or not people saw those as similar destinations to places like Lake Placid and Saranac Lake. What's interesting about this is, we then co-sponsored the survey effort with them. And we were also able to get some significant support from the Lake George Chamber of Commerce in terms of using their mailing list to expand the already in-place mailing list that Roost was using. Within 8 days, we received 7,000 responses. This is a staggering number of people. I'm sure Joanne, if she were here, would tell you that we don't typically get this kind of response from things we send out to people who have visited us. They tend to think of it as junk mail and move on. 7,000 people took the time to respond. Of those, 91% told us that they are considering moving here. I just want you to just digest that for a second. 7,000 people stopped doing what they were doing to tell us that they're coming or they're seriously considering coming. Of those that told us that they're considering coming, 50% make more than $110,000 a year. We're talking about a kind of movement of human capital and intellectual capital that I don't think we have seen in this region ever. Now, they also told us some things about how they would make that decision, when they would make that decision, what they would need in order to make that decision. What's interesting about this is they told us that access to housing is number one, access to broadband is number two, and the ability to work remotely is number three. Of those 7,000 people that responded, 10% said we are moving here to the Adirondacks in the next 5 years. Another 15% said we are trying to figure out if we can make our remote learning, our remote job permanent, at which point we are going to move. And the other 75% said we're trying to figure it out, or 60%, I guess it is. They also told us that it's the access to recreation and the quality of life here that drives them here. I don't think that will take anyone by surprise, but now we have numbers to quantify what we already know. Most importantly, it gives us the early warning for us to understand that we have a challenge of not only receiving and better defining this movement, but also addressing the challenges that will come with it. This is a good problem to have, but make no mistake about it, we must be aggressive and proactive, or we will have challenges like other communities have had with gentrification and pricing out the people who live here now from being able to continue to live here and make a living here. I'm telling you that this is not a crisis, this is an opportunity. But we must put our resources together immediately to look at our current affordable housing, the other problems that we already are working, things like childcare and access to transportation. But we got to go proactively deal with this in lockstep. For every 100 people who show up in this way, we are going to have an attendant impact on our housing stock, both the pricing and availability of it. When I met with the Association of Southern Adirondack Realtors last week, they told me that we're at less than 3 months supply, which is traditionally viewed as the point at which housing is entered into a pricing dynamic, what they call a bubble. Supply does not keep up with demand. And it's been that way for quite some time, a number of months. This signals to us that this is not going to abate. We need to address it. I'm suggesting that we immediately augment our current task force to include a housing work group made up of realtors, builders, people who have expertise in affordable housing. Judy Calogero, for instance, has done a wonderful job in helping Glens Falls develop quite a nexus of affordable housing. Her voice will be helpful to you. But we need a strategy that will provide affordable housing, what I believe to be using the spine of the Northway as the backbone. And we've got to figure out how to keep pace with the movement which is coming. I'm glad to report this, but I also think we have work in front of us. One last thing I would tell you is that that chart that's over there on the left side there, I'm about to send that out to our membership. So I want you to know what it is that we're telling all of the businesses in the community. These are all the major things that we're working on the community's behalf. And so you got to see it before they did. None of it should take you by surprise, but all of it, I think, represents a significant amount of work. All right, last chart. I wanted to give you an update on where we stand on several of the things that we're doing in conjunction or for you. The task force that I helped kind of evolve from the start that Mike Wild had given to it is continuing to act as a central landing place for anybody that is interested in understanding all of the issues around economic recovery. We have a Thursday work group. That's the original work group that Mike formed. It's primarily a place where we provide updates and a full clearinghouse on anything associated with the resources around COVID and the associated recovery. So we have not changed that. In fact, the membership has actually expanded since we took it over, which I'm encouraged by. There's obviously, you also know all about the tourism subgroup of that Mark Behan leads. They've had plenty of interaction with you on their own, and they have done a remarkable job of taking the private sector's voice and bringing it together with the public sector to bring important issues to bear so that we can have information to make good decisions. I really believe we need to expand this now to, as I said, include housing. That's a clear challenge that we're going to have countywide. And I would encourage your recommendations to me about people that we would want to include in that. I think we may also take this model and expand it to other areas as well. No matter what we do, we're going to build on the data and the reputation that we're building for being able to support public and private partnership. I gave an interview this morning to the press, and then one of the things they asked me was, on broadband and all these other areas, you seem to be, one step ahead of everyone. What's the kind of the message behind that? And I said, it's very, very simple. In Warren County, when COVID started, the private sector met together with the public sector and said, we're going to hold hands together through this and figure out how to do this together. That doesn't happen everywhere. It is special, and we should really value it. It gives us an opportunity to do things faster and better than other places. People look at what happened at Lake George and they say, how in the world did you do that? How did you save the season safely? We did that because people from all sectors of our community got together and figured out how to do it together. Don't take that for granted. Let us help you continue that. That is the secret sauce of Warren County. Last thing I would tell you, I've had several inquiries, some more friendly than others, about how we're doing in terms of developing the properties that we are responsible for. We've had a portfolio of properties that we either are responsible for the city of Glens Falls or for the county for a number of years. It has not been successful. We have not got extensive development on either what's known as Tech Meadows, which is the city's property off of exit 18, or the Queensbury Park near the airport. We need to revisit that strategy. There's no doubt about that. But it's also important to understand, we are not looking to fill this with a bunch of warehouses. We could do that right now. We could essentially compete with what's happening in Route 9 and Moreau to see who could build more big warehouses. But warehouses do not generate the economic value that we have the potential to generate. We should take a moment, take a deep breath and say, what should the strategy be for us for the next 10 or 20 years? I know it's hard when we've sat on these properties that have not been developed for 10 years and say, oh, so we're going to take some more time to figure this out. But yes, that is the answer. Because if we slap a bunch of warehouses up, we will fill them. They will largely be automated. We will have very little in the way of long-term employment. We will have a fair amount of truck traffic. I'm not sure we will be pleased with the outcome. I think we have the opportunity to meet with others, and in fact, I'm starting today. There are foundations I cannot name yet because they don't want to be named, but they're big money foundations that are interested in things like clean technology because of our location at the edge of the park and because of our heritage with things like Just. We have put ourselves on the map. And we should give ourselves an opportunity to figure out what would it take to make ourselves attractive to that type of industry that wants to develop a clean energy or clean technology product. The reason is because we're at the gateway of the Adirondacks. More than half our county is behind the blue line. We need a strategy that will work for the entire county with these parcels as part of that tool set. But the goal should be for us to develop in a way that's consistent with how the whole county can operate, or at least be available for it. I don't want us to quickly move all this inventory to say we are done with it. But I will promise you this, we will work very aggressively this year to recast the strategy. We've had the first set of meetings with the city. We will engage the county next, and we will develop a strategy and we will begin marketing down this direction by the end of the year. And I would encourage all of your support and input on this because this is a tool set that we have to do what's in our own best interest. So that's everything I have. Thank you. I probably took more than my time, but I appreciate it. If there are questions, that's certainly good.
Jim, that was great. Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Comments? Anybody in the boardroom? Supervisor Wild.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Jim, great job as always. I am struck by the strategy piece in terms of what type of growth we want. And I do believe that that's one of the most important things that we need to consider going forward. I agree warehouses aren't really the right approach. But as I've mentioned before in some other meetings, when I was going through the county last year talking to individual towns, I did hear comments that were against growth. We wanted to keep our culture. We wanted to keep our towns and villages the way they've always been. And we need to take that into consideration as we go forward. And I'm really encouraged that we're going to take a look at that strategy and do a deep dive on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Wild. Is there anyone else who has a question for Jim? Comments? Anybody in the boardroom? Supervisor McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Jim. Really, from day one, you're just your energy and the knowledge that you bring. I just want to congratulate you on the full-fledged appointment today. It was great news, and really, I'm looking forward to working with you and really and all you do for our area. So appreciate it.
We're very excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor McGowan. Is there anyone else before we move on? Jim, again, that was great. Thank you so much. One of the points that Jim touched on was affordability and access for broadband. And, you know, that can't be stressed enough as something we should and must be focusing on. So to that point, I asked Kevin Lynch to come from SLIC. He is going to speak to us about some of the challenges his industry is facing in their rollout. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, glad to be here. So, yeah, I spoke probably 2 weeks ago to Andrea just about some of the things that's going on. And so what I was hoping to do today, I want to take a few minutes to talk. I think one thing that would be important to give you an update is SLIC recently participated in the FCC's auction called the Rural Digital Opportunities Fund, seeking federal dollars for continued broadband expansion. We weren't really allowed to talk about it in detail until January 29th when we completed our paperwork. There's a quiet period to make sure that bidders aren't colluding or doing other dastardly things. So we honored that. But I will tell you, we did apply for a good portion of Warren County. Unfortunately, we lost those bids to Frontier. Part of the bidding process is we had to say what tier we would bid at. And so we bid at 100 megabit tier, which we thought was something we were fully capable of doing. What we saw from that auction is a lot of companies bid at a gigabit, which potentially we could do. But I guess you could say we played it too conservatively. And so unfortunately, we lost that bid to Frontier. So Frontier did win some amount of federal dollars to bring gigabit to portions of Warren County and over into Hamilton County. That program has a 6-year time frame for that build out, and we did win a handful of other properties throughout the Adirondack region, but not in Warren County. Doesn't really affect the current grant that we're working on, but it would have been a supplemental and included some other additional areas that we don't currently serve or have a plan to serve in Warren County. As Jim said, we recently turned up the cabinet in Thurman Station, and we've been doing about 30 installs a week in and around Thurman. There's still areas where we're still finalizing the splicing. I know right now we're working on Garnet Lake Road to splice that in by the March 1st to get some properties up there. And there is a section right in Thurman where we're having some discussions with National Grid and Verizon. I will be in the field with them on Thursday to try and hammer that out so that we can quickly get that built, and that will open up about 500 additional residences in that area very quickly with service to broadband. So the project in Warren County is going along. We have lots of crews out in the field. We've been averaging 12 to 15 miles of fiber in the air over the last month and a half, doing lots of splicing and getting new properties up and connected. So even remote little places like Barton Mines now has broadband, which is great, up at the end of the road there. So the project's going well. As Andrea mentioned, though, there are definitely some headwinds that we are facing as an industry, and particularly a small company that predominantly relies on a rural market. Unlike some of our competitors, we do not have facilities in large metropolitan areas to generate revenues that we can then subsidize our rural areas. We are pretty much exclusively a rural company. And so our margins and our ability to do that can be affected very drastically by some changes within the state. I will state that when we applied for these grants in 2017, there are a lot of things that were different in the environment than they are today, not even including COVID. One of the things was in 2017 when we applied for these grants, fiber optic cable on private property was non-taxable. That's about 70% of our plant. At the end of 2019, there was a court ruling, and the court decided that fiber optic was now taxable on private property, which increased our taxes by about 70% and has a drastic impact on our bottom line. With that, we've also run into some challenges with the state. We are a cable company as well as an internet company. Now, we don't offer cable television service in all of our areas, and in Warren County at this point, we only have plans to offer it in Johnsburg. However, the state taxing jurisdiction seems to think because we were born a telecom company that we are not able to get that exclusion that cable companies do. And so, you know, one of the challenges we run into is when you look in the state legislation, ISPs really aren't addressed. They talk about telecommunications companies and they talk about cable TV companies. And this thing called an ISP isn't really found in there. And so it's up to the individual agencies to decide what we are, even, because of what we were born as. And so that's a real challenge for us. So for example, Spectrum, being a cable company, does not pay taxes on their facilities on private property. And so we're currently in litigation on that one, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But that's a real challenge for us. That definitely changed the playing field from the time we applied to the grant to where we are today. The other thing that we're seeing as a challenge is that in a lot of the ways that our taxes are calculated, there's two ways we're taxed. There is the special franchise, which is the portion of our properties that are on over public streets, roads, either on or above public streets, roads, highways, etc. That's called the special franchise. That is assessed at a state level. Local towns have no ability to do anything other than take that assessment that comes down from the state. That is an artifact from the Teddy Roosevelt administration to try and fight public corruption. So I think there's some good reasoning behind it, but the reality is if the state sets a very high assessment, the only choice we have as a company is to challenge that. We have to challenge it at the town level, even though the town doesn't set the assessment. So it creates a very interesting challenge for us to adjust those assessments, which we have found in a lot of cases are extreme and excessive. Just to give you a point of reference, in the town of Potsdam, our taxes are about $40,000 a year. Spectrum, which is a much larger footprint in the town of Potsdam, pays about half of that. And so those are very difficult economics for us to work with. Outside of the special franchise is the tax roll 6, which is the public utility property on private property. And so even though we're an ISP, we're not really a utility, we're not really regulated like a utility. For taxing purposes, they treat us as utility. Those, they set what's called a telecommunication ceiling. So again, the state takes our inventory data, our cost for building out these networks, and they calculate an assessment, and they give it to the local assessor, and they say, this is your do not exceed assessment. This is your ceiling. The problem is most local assessors have no idea how to assess utility type property. It's unique property. It's different than someone's house or a building or other property. And so most assessors just go ahead and they use that ceiling assessment as the assessment, which it really isn't, but that's what it is. And again, what we've seen is we have exceedingly high assessments. Right now, our overall assessments in New York State far exceed the value of our company, which means that the value of all of our non-cable assets, our trucks, our people, our buildings, would have a negative value, which clearly is not possible. So there's a real challenge there. The taxing at this point can be up to $500 or $600 a mile, depending on the jurisdiction we're in. And often in those miles, we're only serving 5 or 6 people. So that's a huge tax burden that we have to overcome that really cuts into our ability to build into low density areas. On top of that, we pay pole rental fees, which again can be $400 or $500 a mile. And so what you quickly see is the first couple of months every year are simply paying off the taxes and fees before we even start recovering any of our capital investments and service to our customers. So we have some real challenge there with the taxes, to the point where it really prevents us from building out in non-grant areas because we just can't make the economics work. So the reality is there's this tax that can be generated if we build, but we won't build, so the tax doesn't exist. So, I'm encouraging to the folks that talk about, well, let's think about how we might do that differently. I'm not for a moment saying we should be tax exempt. I just think the taxes need to be in line with the economic activity that we're generating. Okay, so the way the state currently does our tax assessment, it's based on the cost of construction. So a mile of fiber in North Creek, costs roughly $30,000 to build. A mile of fiber in downtown Glens Falls probably costs about $35,000 a mile to build. The economic revenue I can get from a mile in Glens Falls far exceeds what I'll get in North River. There just isn't a population there to generate it. Yet I'm going to pay the same amount of tax on it because of the way the state does the assessment. And that's a problem. I would much rather see those taxes be based on some kind of either a gross receipts basis, where obviously the more money we generate, the more we pay. But the effect of that tax structure means that the tax burden for companies that operate in urban areas is so much less as a proportion of their economic activity than a rural provider. It is essentially an extremely regressive tax that really limits building out in rural areas. On top of this, again, after the time we bid, the DOT has now assessed a fiber occupancy fee for fiber optic cable located on state highway rights of way. This was put in the budget in 2019. Again, this overturns over 100 years of precedent where those state highway rights of way were actually prohibited from charging fees to utilities and other companies like us because it was recognized what a great economic opportunity that is. And especially in the North Country, how do you get from town to town? It's almost always a state highway. There's a few exceptions, but by and large, those corridors is how you get economic development into these communities. And so, rightfully so, for decades, utilities, water, telephone, electric were not charged a fee to use those rights of way. In fact, they were encouraged to use those rights of way to bring development into those areas. Now we have this fee. This fee is over $2,000, or excuse me, it's $1,300 a mile to be in every year it's assessed. Every time we go across the highway, it's an additional 200 miles. So you mean you have a road that does a few twists and turns, quickly that's $1,000 that's going to add up as we crisscross the state highway. They did put an exception for New York State funded grants, but we also have federal funded grants. And the fact that this does not apply for if we do our builds out of our own pocket, it makes it completely uneconomical to build in a rural area. And we don't, again, a lot of times, as you know, people live along these state highways. So it's not like we're not serving residents. We're not just passing through. We're actually trying to provide a service. And so those DOT fees are extremely regressive. And on top of that, now we're being asked that we have to survey before we can get a permit to determine what the right-of-way is, because apparently that is not a known factor. And I can't get too much into that because these are discussions I'm having, and I don't want to just disclose. It's just not appropriate in a public setting. But it's a real issue for us, these DOT fees. The net effect is, before these fees and taxes were in place, with grant-funded areas, we could afford to build at places as low as 4 homes a mile. With our own funds, we could build at 7 homes a mile and expect a reasonable economic return. Now, with the increased taxes and the increased fees, for grant funding, we need to look at least 8 or 9 homes a mile, which wipes out huge portions of Warren County. You just don't have that kind of density, and that's why people love it, because you don't have that kind of density, okay? And if we're doing it self-funded, we have to have 27 homes a mile. That eliminates rural broadband from a self-funded perspective because of these fees and taxes that were being charged. And on top of that, and we've talked in the past about the pole owners, the amount of make-ready work that is being put onto the broadband provider as we come into these communities to address long-standing infrastructure issues. One of the reasons I'm going out on the field Thursday is to look at that and say, no, this pole, actually, it's not slick that's causing you to replace the pole. The pole needs to be replaced because it's been in the ground from 1960 and there's an existing violation on it. That should not be our responsibility to correct. So those are some of the challenges we have, is that not only from the public utilities, but from the state taxation, the state fees, they're continuing to make it economically infeasible to bring broadband to these places. And then I'll mention too, there's a proposed ELearning Tax. This is a tax that will be applied to ISPs' intrastate revenues, which we're not even sure how that's defined yet, but that's what they're saying. And the idea here is to create a fund to help build broadband out. The problem is that may work with a large company that has large metropolitan areas and can generate and absorb this additional fee. For a company like us, it just pushes the needle again towards uneconomic ability, because we're going to be taxed yet again. And as I relayed to the senator who was sponsoring that bill, to her staff, even if you provide these state funds to SLIC to go build out rural areas, if I'm just going to turn around and hand that to taxes and hand that off to the DOT, it doesn't achieve the goal that we're trying to do, right? We can't just continue to add taxes on it and throw money at it and then pay those taxes. We're just laundering money around different state agencies instead of actually going out and building broadband. And then finally, I'll mention the governor had a proposal to mandate a $15 broadband option. That would absolutely devastate our company. It's not that I understand broadband is a burden for many, but I will say that for the individual who doesn't have broadband today, it doesn't matter if it's $15 a month or $15,000 a month. It doesn't help them. Access is an issue. Affordability is a secondary issue, but in a lot of our areas, the primary issue is access. They have to be able to get to the broadband. And as some of you supervisors will know, as a company, as SLIC, we will work to make sure the schools have affordable broadband. I haven't had a single school district contact me tell me they couldn't afford the broadband. I've asked them to help, and we have. Just up the road in Newcomb, they said, hey, we've got a 100 meg connection. We think with the remote learning, we need to go to 200 meg. Can you give me a price? And I said, Skip, I tell you what, we'll turn it up for 2 months, see what it works. If it works for you, then we'll figure out the price. But we'll get you the bandwidth you need so the students can be taught. And that's what we will do. We don't need that mandated down from on high. We need to work with the local communities we're in and solve these problems. Andrea has contacted me to say, hey, I've got somebody who's low income. Do you have a special rate? Yes, we do. Do we advertise it? No. But the people who need it can ask, and we have special rates for students on free and reduced lunch, for seniors on SSDI, disabled veterans. We care a lot about our community, and we will make sure it's affordable. But if you put that $15 rate out there, in some of these communities we serve, as you know, 50 to 60% of the school children qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so if you took our revenue and you dropped it down there, it would just, we couldn't make a return on our operating costs to be able to continue to serve broadband. And we'd be forced to pull back from what we're doing. And I don't think that's the right direction, and definitely not the direction we want to go. And lastly, I'll just stay on that same topic about having coherent policy. Is in the last stimulus bill that passed, there was a huge pot of money. I think it was $3 billion for broadband affordability. And SLIC is working with that program. And what that program will do is for households that qualify, they can get a $50 rebate that would pay to us on their broadband. So if their broadband service is $60 a month, they would pay $10. The federal government would make up the other $50. So we would be made whole on the $60 that we charge for that service, and the consumer would pay $10 out of pocket, $5 less than the Cuomo administration's proposal, and yet it doesn't economically harm us in this time frame. So I just want to put it out there that there's a lot of competing issues around broadband, and we really need to push the state to have a coherent, holistic policy towards broadband, because we can't be putting fund out one hand and then putting the hand out and taking those funds back. That it just doesn't work. It's not good economic sense. And at the end of the day, we want to get out and serve people. That's what, this is our market. This is our backyard. We all live here. We work here. We're passionate about the North Country. And so we just need your help to help the folks in the state understand the reality of it and how important it is to get broadband into these communities. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Supervisor Strauss.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Very interesting. And it also made me think, too, because the cable company franchise agreement, which is usually a 10-year agreement, is coming to term. And the world between the internet service providers like yourself and the cable company, that world has become very blurred. But if you look at the language and the structure of the franchise agreement and the vocabulary, it's already outdated. It's archaic. And I remember the first time, 10 years ago, when I negotiated with Time Warner at that time, I would go to the PSC and say, listen, it doesn't look fair. And they would say, well, it's the FCC. They got that overall structure, and they blame it on the FCC. The federal structure and the federal regulations make us do it this way. So it becomes quite complicated. So I can relate to the issues you're trying to deal with. Do the ISPs like yourself have an advocacy group in New York and in the federal government? Because you certainly need one. And we as consumers certainly need some attention paid to this.
Yeah, I would say in New York, we have NYSTA, which is New York State Telephone Association, but that's really more towards the traditional ILEC. So that's like the Nickelville telephone, some of the other small telcos. Some of the bigger telcos are involved as well. And it does a little bit touch on the ISP issues, but it's really more focused on telephone. We do have a national group that we're working with, the NCTA, the Rural Broadband Association, and they do have some advocacy. And there are some unique things in New York State. So, for example, I talked about the full attachment process. New York State is one of 20 states where the FCC has delegated that authority to the Public Service Commission. The challenge is that the Public Service Commission doesn't always follow the FCC best practices, and so we get these issues. And you know, it's a challenge because I feel that sometimes what's in the public interest is not always represented when it comes to the ISP. You know, for example, I would think that the Public Service Commission would be very interested in this DOT tax because it's clearly not in the public interest if it's prohibiting us from building out broadband. But to date, they've been relatively silent on the point. You know, I've mentioned in the past, we've actually had projects up here in the North Country that have been completely canceled because there's no economic model that allows us to build 2 miles on a state highway and serve 8 people and not lose money. That can't happen. And I agree. What's happened is, you know, if you look at a spectrum and you look at a SLIC, what do? We do voice, data, video. What does Spectrum do? Voice, data, video. We have the same exact suite of services, yet we're subject to different taxation, different regulations, different incentives, and it just doesn't work. You know, we're dealing with legislation that was written before, you know, it was written in the late 90s when, you know, internet was dial-up. It was a phone service. And that's all changed now, but we haven't kept up. And the different agencies are now interpreting those outdated laws to their own way. And so, you know, we have situations where, well, in case A, the Public Service Commission ruling applies for how you calculate the cost of construction, but when you report it to what you actually have in your plan account, well, then no, you can't use the PSC. Now you have to use the taxation. And so we really get in a tight spot with that.
Yeah, I can understand that, and the state and the federal government got to get in motion here and make the changes accordingly. Yeah, I feel for you.
Thank you, Supervisor Stroh. Is there anybody else on the committee who would like to comment or has a question? Supervisor Wild.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Is there a way we can move this over to government ops and advocacy to see if they can maybe take the lead on this and make some noise downstate?
What's the pleasure of the committee? Anybody in the boardroom? I would wholeheartedly endorse that. I would just say I would recommend that they work with Kevin or Kevin's designee to craft the advocacy. Would that be okay, Kevin?
Anything I can do to help?
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Yeah, I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Comments? All in favor of asking government ops and advocacy to craft a piece of advocacy for us?
We know what you're talking about.
Thank you. I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Excellent. Well done. Thank you, Kevin. As always, you are so clear in your explanations, and it's so appreciated. It really helps us to understand what we're dealing with here. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, I appreciate it. And I just one other thing too. I've been working with Jim, economic development, and I appreciate the support there. You mentioned Roost. They are a customer of ours, which is great. Just recently, we picked them up in Lake Placid. And so again, for local businesses, please reach out to us. We have lots of solutions, and we would love to help. And for all the town supervisors, if we are providing service in your town,
a couple minutes,
and you know people who need help, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will try and do whatever we can to get people connected. Thank you.
Thanks again, Kevin. All right, before we move on to the planning portion, oh, hold on one sec, Supervisor Wild.
Madam Chair, thank you again. Just something just popped into my head, but I recall something a number of months back that had to do with the towns individually negotiating with the cable companies on their own schedules. And I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for us to jointly negotiate to maybe help get some of these issues resolved?
Kevin, how many of the Warren County towns have your cable?
So right now it's just Johnsburg. And I can discuss the reasons for that offline. This is a public forum, so I want to be a little sensitive to that from a business perspective. Let's just say TV is a very challenging business right now. And I'll just add to that, because this, I think, is also a point of confusion where the state has not done a very good job clarifying. The franchise agreements really only apply to the television portion of the service. And I know a lot of times trying to get things in there for the internet and other things, and so there's just not a good mechanism there to tie those two together. And I do know, I'll just put it out there, I know there's a piece of pending legislation. I don't know that it'll go anywhere, but talking about going to a statewide franchise model as opposed to individual town-based franchise model. And again, I don't know that that's a good or bad idea. I just know that that's something that's out there.
Thank you. And Supervisor Wild, thank you for your willingness to help the towns with this, but Johnsburg's got this one. Anybody else while we still have Kevin? All right. Before we move on to planning, I need to ask for a motion to accept the minutes from the January 20th meeting.
I'll make that motion.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Supervisor Frazier?
Thank you, Supervisor Frazier. Do I have a second?
John Strow, I'll second.
Thank you, Supervisor Strow. Comments, questions, changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Excellent. Wayne, take it away.
Okay, thank you. For today's meeting, there are three requests for committee action. Number one on the agenda is to appropriate funds from the town poster deferred revenue account. As many of you know, Sarah led the charge, our employee of the month, led the charge for creation of posters that were up at the Lake George Visitor Center. We had those printed, and there was a good push over the holidays for Christmas presents, and we pretty much depleted a couple of the towns, and we're low on inventory. So we would like to utilize some of those funds to reprint some of the posters that are low in revenue stock. This is money that was set aside from the sales of the poster just for this purpose. So it's not general fund. It's just a special deferred revenue.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to bring this to the floor?
Supervisor Merlino, I'll make that motion.
Supervisor Merlino? And Supervisor Frazier on the second?
Yes.
Thank you. Anybody want to comment? Questions? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
The next committee action is an outgrowth of the hospitality group that Sarah has been involved with. So I'll defer to Sarah on this one if she's still on.
So this is Sarah Mannix, who's on the hospitality group committee, very graciously has offered to donate $1,000 of a printing credit at Glens Falls Printing to get reprints of our the cell sheets, which are the 8.5 by 11 version of the posters that are in the visitor center, and they have a map on the back side. I think you all have copies of those, but we depleted our the amount that we could print through our grant funds. So we didn't have funds to get them reprinted, and Sarah is graciously donating funds to get them printed. So we just wanted to say thank you very much for that donation from her.
So to be clear, this isn't going to cost the county anything. This is entirely a donation.
Yes.
All right. Can I have a motion to bring this to the floor, please?
I'll make that motion. John Strow.
Thank you, Supervisor Strow. Is there a second?
It's Michael, second.
Thank you, Supervisor Frazier. I heard you on that one. Any discussion, comments, questions? Anybody in the boardroom?
There he is.
Sorry. All right, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And Sarah, would you get me Sarah's address so I can write a thank you note, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. And again, this is more great work coming out of the task force. Wayne, go ahead.
Okay, the third item, request for committee action is to intent to fill a vacant position. As most of you are aware, Chris Belden left for the Regional Planning Board, so his position is vacant. It's funded in the budget. I would request permission to fill that as soon as possible.
Thanks, Wayne. Can I have a motion, please? I know it's a long meeting.
Oh,
Come
go
on.
ahead.
Thank you, Supervisor Garrity. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Supervisor Frazier.
Thank you, Supervisor Frazier. Any questions? Supervisor Bramer.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hogan. I thought that there were 2 positions that had been advertised. Can you guys talk about what the decision-making process there was to fill the one over the other?
Yes, the assistant county planner position is in the budget and it is funded. The senior planner position, last time that we solicited for positions in the department, it was very hard to get anybody to apply. So I took the approach this time that we could apply or advertise for both the senior planner and an assistant county planner and see what the mix was and the qualifications of the respondents. Quite honestly, we had 4 respond to each, and you know, I guess this is the discussion item that I had down below, but it marries right into this. So there, in each of those, in the passenger seat, the assistant county planner and the senior planner, there's really 1 or 2 really good candidates in each, which I'm surprised at. And I think this also goes back to something Jim Siplon mentioned, in that there are people who are looking to relocate from urban centers to a more rural. You know, most of the applications came from you know, urban centers, West Coast, downstate regions, out near the Buffalo region. So all of them, except for 1, really are from urban areas that are looking to relocate to this area. The preference, obviously, is to replace the skill set that was lost when Chris moved over to the Regional Planning Board. So, and that's the one that's funded in the budget without having to create a new position, because there is no senior planner actually slot in the department. So that's my preference to fill, is that position.
Supervisor Bramer?
Thanks. I was wondering if the people, so you got 8 altogether applicants, are you going to consider those that applied for the other one if they do qualify for the assistant county planner job, or are they completely ruled out because they applied for that one that we're not hiring?
No, I mean, I would consider in my opinion, I can't talk for the HR office, but I would consider, if they meet the qualifications for either position, I would consider them. I think you have to look at the disparity of incomes. It's almost $20,000 difference. And I think that's why the people with a higher experience level apply for the assistant county planner. So I think the disparity there, if somebody applied for the assistant county planner at $62,000 or whatever it is, I would question whether they'd be willing to accept a $42,000 a year position. So,
may I have one more, Chairwoman? I didn't realize. Thank you. I didn't realize that there was such a large gap there. And was that advertised like that?
Yes. This is the discussion that I've had with HR before. Well, with Trish actually, in that the union sets the pay grade. And that we're competing when you use the senior planner title. We're competing with other entities in the county that are paying $63,000 to $67,000 for a senior planner. So I think our pay scale, quite honestly, is out of whack with what the local communities are paying. So it's hard to compete in that area.
Okay. I mean, that's great, Wayne. Thank you. I'm glad we got so many good applicants, and it's exciting. To me, it's cool that people are looking to come here. So I don't know. I had some concerns that if they weren't sure which position to apply for and they accidentally picked the wrong one, or, they thought, okay, this might be better for me based on that description, that they didn't apply for the other one. I mean, I don't know. Just take a close look at all of them, I guess I'd ask you. Before you rule somebody out based on just the position that they applied for, I think we want the best person, obviously. I know you'll do that. All right. Thanks, Wayne.
I think, quite honestly, that there is a clear separation in the applicant pool as far as candidates go. I did have a discussion with Supervisor Hogan about trying to meet with you and her next week to talk about the staffing issues. As most of you are aware, I've stated that this is my last year at the county. After 40 years, I figure it's time to head out the door. When that actually occurs depends on staffing here in the office and how we transition. That's all part of the discussion that I wanted to I have an idea in mind of a roadmap of how we get to 2022. But that involves discussion and maybe a senior planner position in the interim. So that's all part of the discussion that I want to have. So, but right for now, I'd like to fill the assistant county planner position. As a matter of fact, in 8 minutes, I have an interview with somebody. So
get to it then. Thank you. Sounds good, Wayne. Thanks. I'll touch base with Supervisor Hogan.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Wayne from the committee or off the committee? Anybody in the boardroom? All right. To remind you, this is a vote to approve the notice of intent to fill. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Wayne, you got anything else for us?
Just want to briefly update. Pat and I are working on grant applications, assisting the town of Warrensburg and the town of Chester with engineering grants. And we'll also we have started work on the grant application for updates to the countryside. Now that the board has approved the provision of the $1 million matching fund requirement, or not really matching funds, but the gap in the funding issues there. So those grants are due March 5th. And that's really our major focus at this point, is getting those out the door. So other than that, we talked about the discussion of vacant positions, I think. So that's all I have for today.
Thanks, Wayne. Much appreciated. Are there any other comments or questions from the board? Don, is there any public comment?
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Hogan. There is no comment on YouTube as of now.
Thank you. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Supervisor Stroud. Oh, thank you, Supervisor Fraser, but Supervisor Stroud beat you to it. Supervisor Garrity on the second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Have a good afternoon. Thank you. It was a dense meeting, I know, but thanks for hanging in there.